That cold morning, no one expected an act of compassion to change everything. What started as another quiet day near the reserve became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, every roar and every breath matters, because behind every white tiger there is a story worth saving. The frost clung to the pine needles like a fragile promise, turning the forest edge into a world of whispered whites and greys. It was the kind of dawn that settled heavy on the shoulders of Willow Creek, a remote town hugging the boundaries of the Blackwood Wildlife Reserve. In the shadowed hills of Montana, the air bit sharp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke from the ranger station a mile back. Engines from the occasional logging truck rumbled faintly on the empty highway, then faded into silence, leaving only the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Ranger Elena Vasquez had seen her share of harsh winters in these parts. At 42, with calloused hands and eyes etched by years of patrolling the reserve's fraying edges, she moved through her routine like a shadow, checking trail cams, noting fresh tracks in the snow. But that morning, as she crested the ridge overlooking the ravine, something pulled her up short. A weak, mewling cry pierced the quiet, not the bold roar of a predator staking claim, but something smaller, more desperate. It came from the underbrush below, where the trees thinned into a rocky clearing. Elena's breath hitched, fogging the air as she gripped her radio. She wasn't one for panic. Poachers, injured deer, lost hikers. She'd handled them all. But this sound tugged at something deeper, a primal echo that made her pulse quicken. She descended carefully, her boots sinking into the thin crust of snow, the cold seeping through her gloves. The cry grew fainter, ragged, like a thread unraveling in the wind. There, huddled against the base of an ancient hemlock, was the cub. No bigger than a house cat, its fur a startling pure white, dusted with frost that made it blend into the snow like a ghost. A white tiger cub, impossible, yet undeniable. The Blackwood Reserve wasn't home to tigers. Rumors swirled of escaped exotics from a shuttered roadside zoo decades ago, but sightings were myths, whispers around campfires. This one was real, its tiny chest heaving with labored breaths, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion. Blood speckled the snow, not much, just enough to hint at a recent struggle, mingled with the metallic tang in the air. The cub's sides quivered, and as Elena approached, it let out another feeble whimper, paws twitching weakly. She knelt slowly, her knees protesting against the cold stone. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice low, barely above the rustle of leaves. The cub didn't flee. It couldn't. Its eyes, a piercing blue, fixed on her with a trust that bordered on surrender. White tigers were rare, a genetic quirk that made them stand out in the wild, beautiful but vulnerable. This one had been abandoned, left to the elements. Elena's mind raced. Where was the mother? A tigress would fight tooth and claw for her young, unless the cub's difference marked it as weak, unworthy in the brutal calculus of survival. The radio crackled in her pocket, but she ignored it for now. Her hand hovered, trembling slightly, before she shrugged off her jacket and wrapped it around the shivering form. The cub's fur was wet, matted from the night's chill, and its body heat was fading fast. She could feel the rapid flutter of its heart against her palm, a fragile rhythm fighting the encroaching cold. In that moment, the forest held its breath, the wind dying down, the distant highway falling silent, as if the world itself waited for her choice. Back at the ranger station, the morning routine unfolded without her. Tom Hargrove, the veteran vet who volunteered his weekends at the reserve, sipped black coffee by the wood stove, his face lined with the weariness of a man who'd buried too many animals. At 68, he'd seen the reserve change, funding cuts, encroaching development, animals pushed to the brink. Another stray? He'd grumble if Elena radioed in, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over chainsaws. But deep down, Tom carried his own ghosts. A farm dog he'd failed to save as a boy, a decision that still haunted his dreams. In town, word travelled slow but sure. Lila Monroe, the elderly widow who ran the general store on the highway's edge, heard the first murmurs from a passing trucker. Her hands, gnarled from arthritis, paused over the ledger as she imagined the scene, a white tiger cub, alone in the snow. Lila had lost her husband to the wilds years ago, a logging accident, and since then she'd viewed the forest with a mix of reverence and resentment. Nature takes care of its own, she'd say to customers, but her eyes would betray the doubt, the quiet ache for second chances. Elena lifted the cub gently, cradling it against her chest as she climbed back up the ridge. Its weight was negligible, but the responsibility pressed like lead. The mother's tracks circled nearby, deep paw prints vanishing into the thicker woods as if she'd paced, then turned away. Rejection. In the tiger's world, difference was a death sentence. The white coat, so striking, made camouflage impossible, marked the cub as prey before it could hunt. Elena's throat tightened. She thought of her own son, lost to illness 5 years back, his small body fighting against odds no child should face. The parallels stung, unbidden. By the time she reached her truck, the sun had crested the hills, casting long shadows that danced like uncertain allies. She laid the cub on a blanket in the passenger seat, its breaths shallow but steadying under the warmth. The engine roared to life, gravel crunching under tires as she headed for the station. But doubt gnawed, call animal control, and risk the cub being deemed a threat. Shipped off to some facility where it would wither, or fight for it against policy, against the town's wary eyes. The drive blurred into a haze of white-knuckled focus, the cub's soft whines the only sound breaking the hum of the heater. Elena glanced over, meeting those blue eyes again. In them she saw not ferocity, but a silent plea, a creature born different, abandoned not for weakness, but for standing apart. The reserve's gates loomed ahead, a threshold between wild indifference and human mercy. As she pulled up, Tom stepped out, squinting against the light. "What you got there, Elena?" he asked, his voice dropping as he saw the bundle. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she unwrapped the jacket, revealing the cub's pale form. Tom's face paled, then softened. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, reaching out a hand that shook just a little. In that touch, the morning's frost began to thaw. But the real cold, the moral chill of what came next, lingered in the air. The town would soon buzz with it, a white tiger cub, forsaken by its own. But for Elena, it was already more. A mirror to her own unspoken regrets. A fragile life demanding she choose compassion over caution. As the cub stirred faintly, its paw brushing her finger, she knew this quiet dawn had cracked open something irreversible. The story of survival had just begun, whispered on the wind through the pines. The station's wood stove crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the worn pine walls, where faded maps of the Blackwood Reserve hung like forgotten promises. Elena eased the truck to a stop, the engine's rumble dying into the hush of the morning. Tom's boots scraped the gravel as he approached, his breath visible in the crisp air, eyes narrowing on the bundle in her arms. She stepped out, cradling the cub close, its white fur stark against the dark wool of her jacket. The creature's sides rose and fell in shallow rhythms, each breath a faint rasp that seemed to echo the wind's sigh through the pines outside. Tom's hand paused mid-reach, his fingers hovering like he was testing the air for danger. At 68, he'd patched up black bears with shotgun wounds and nursed orphaned elk through blizzards. But this was something out of a half-remembered tale. "White tiger," he muttered, more to himself than to her, his voice gravelly from years of terse field reports. He didn't touch it yet, just studied the tiny form. The oversized paws, the blue eyes flickering open briefly, pupils dilating in the dim light, filtering through the station's grimy windows. No blood now, just the chill's cruel grip, turning the cub's extremities pale and limp. Elena followed him inside, the door creaking shut behind them, sealing out the world's indifference. The warmth hit like a balm, but the cub didn't stir much, its body limp as she laid it on the exam table. A scarred oak slab cluttered with bandages and syringes from past emergencies. Tom's hands, steady from decades of surgery, moved with uncharacteristic hesitation. He lit the lantern overhead, its glow illuminating the cub's face, whiskers frosted at the tips, a faint tremor in its jaw, as if dreaming of milk it would never taste from its mother's side. "Abandoned," Elena said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled thick as the frost outside. She recounted the ravine, the tracks leading away, deep, deliberate prints of a larger cat, vanishing into the underbrush like a ghost fleeing judgment. Tom nodded, his face a map of creases deepening with thought. He fetched a stethoscope from a drawer, the metal cold against his palm, and pressed it gently to the cub's chest. The heartbeat was there, erratic but defiant, a tiny drum against the quiet. Hypothermic, dehydrated. That white coat, it's a curse out there, stands out like a beacon to every coyote and hawk in the county. His words hung, laced with the resignation of a man who'd seen nature's math, the weak culled, the different discarded. But his eyes, shadowed by bushy brows, betrayed a flicker. Something softer, remembering that farm dog from his boyhood, the one he'd watched fade under a summer sky because his father deemed it too much trouble. Word spread like ripples on a still pond. By midday, the reserve's access road saw its first visitors, not for hiking, but for whispers. Lila Monroe pulled up in her battered pickup, the general store's delivery run forgotten, as she heard the buzz from a radio call Elena had made to the vet clinic in town. At 74, Lila's steps were slow, her coat buttoned tight against the wind that whipped dust from the highway. She peered through the station's window first, her gnarled hands pressing against the glass, fogging it with her breath. Inside, she found Eleanor and Tom hunched over the cub, a space heater humming nearby, its warmth coaxing faint color back into the fur. "Is it real?" Lila asked, her voice a whisper, as if speaking too loud might shatter the moment. She'd come with a thermos of hot milk, cows, the only kind she had, and a blanket knitted from old wool, soft as forgotten memories. But doubt etched her features. Her husband had died chasing a bear that wandered too close to their homestead, and wildlife, to her, was a line not to cross. Folks in town are saying it's escaped, dangerous. What if the mother comes back looking for trouble? Her eyes darted to the cub, which let out a soft, plaintive mewl, its head lolling toward the sound of her voice. In that noise there was no threat, just hunger, a raw need that pierced the room's tension. Elena straightened, wiping sweat from her brow despite the chill. She'd spent the morning on the radio, arguing with the state wildlife office, their voices crackling with protocol. Euthanize if feral, relocate if exotic. But this cub wasn't feral. It was forsaken, its difference a mark of rarity in a world that prized camouflage over beauty. "It's not dangerous, Lila. It's alone." Her words carried the weight of her own loss, the son whose illness had made him different too, until the world took him anyway. She watched as Lila set the thermos down, her hands trembling slightly, then reached out, hesitant, like touching a flame, to stroke the cub's ear. The creature didn't recoil. Instead, its eyes half opened, locking onto Lila's with a gaze that seemed to see through the fear, straight to the ache beneath. Tom busied himself mixing a formula, warmed milk with electrolytes, administered drop by drop through a syringe. The cub suckled weakly, its throat working in tiny gulps, each one a small victory against the void. Silence stretched again, broken only by the tick of the station's old clock and the distant hum of a truck on the highway. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting the frost into rivulets that traced paths down the pines, mirroring the slow thaw in the room. But judgment lingered in the air, carried on the wind from town. Calls to the station, voices urging caution, labeling the cub a liability, a freak of nature unworthy of the risk. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Elena stepped out for air, her boots crunching on the gravel. The ravine called to her, but she resisted, knowing the mother tigress was out there, fierce, protective of her remaining pride, perhaps watching from the tree line. The cub's survival hinged on this fragile sanctuary, on humans choosing mercy over fear. Back inside, Lila lingered, her initial wariness softening as she wrapped the blanket around the tiny form. "If we turn it away," she murmured. "More to the cub than anyone. What does that say about us?" Tom's nod was subtle, his hands pausing in their work, the weight of the question settling like dust in the still air. The cub stirred then, a paw extending in a feeble stretch, brushing Elena's sleeve as she returned. In that touch, something shifted, a silent pact forming amid the creak of floorboards and the faint scent of warmed milk. The town might judge, the wilderness might reject, but here, in the heart of the reserve, compassion began its quiet rebellion. The white tiger's story, born of abandonment, was weaving itself into the lives of those who dared to listen, one breath at a time. Yet the real test loomed. The cub's fragility demanded more than warmth. It cried for a deeper intervention, one that would force them all to confront the wild within themselves. The afternoon sun dipped lower, painting the Blackwood Reserve in hues of amber and shadow, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Inside the ranger station, the air grew thick with the scent of warmed milk and antiseptic, a fragile barrier against the encroaching dusk. The cub lay on the exam table, its white fur now fluffed slightly from the space heater's glow, but its breaths came in uneven hitches, each one a reminder of the wild's unforgiving math. Elena paced the worn floorboards, her boots echoing softly, while Tom adjusted the IV drip he'd rigged from scavenged supplies, a thin line of saline trickling into the cub's foreleg, stabilizing what the cold had nearly stolen. Lila had stayed, her chair pulled close to the table, hands folded in her lap like a prayer unanswered. The thermos sat empty now, its contents coaxed into the cub drop by drop, but the creature's eyes remained half-lidded, blue depths reflecting the lantern's flicker. No one spoke much, words felt too heavy, too likely to disturb the quiet rhythm of survival unfolding before them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and carrying the faint howl of coyotes from the ravine, a chorus that spoke of predators circling, drawn by the scent of vulnerability. Tom's face tightened as he checked the cub's temperature again, his stethoscope cold against the fur. "Fever's breaking, but she's weak, needs more than this makeshift setup, antibiotics, proper monitoring, hell, a real enclosure." His voice was low, edged with the frustration of a man who'd begged for better resources one too many times. The reserve's budget was a joke, stretched thin by poacher patrols and trail maintenance, leaving little for miracles like this. Elena nodded, her mind already mapping the drive to the regional wildlife center 2 hours east, over icy backroads that twisted like veins through the hills. But doubt gnawed, hand the cub over, and it might end up in a cage, labeled exotic and expendable, shipped to some distant lab or worse. The radio crackled to life then, shattering the hush. It was Sheriff Harlan Beck, his drawl cutting through static like a blade. "Elena, got reports flooding in. Truckers on the highway saying they saw a big cat near the ridge, white as snow. Folks are spooked. You holding out on something up there?" His tone carried the town's undercurrent, fear masked as duty, the kind that turned wonder into threat. Elena gripped the receiver, her knuckles whitening. "It's a cub, Harlan. Abandoned. We're caring for it. A pause, then his sigh, heavy with implication. Caring? That's not protocol. If it's feral, we put it down, protect the community. You know how people get. Last thing we need is panic, lawsuits from some hiker claiming endangerment. Lila's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a fire long banked by grief. She rose slowly, steadying herself on the table's edge, close enough to feel the cub's faint warmth radiating like a shared secret. Protect the community, she echoed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Harlan couldn't see her, but Eleanor could. The way Lila's gaze fixed on the cub, as if seeing her late husband in its fragile form, a life cut short by the wild's indifference. That little one's more innocent than half the drunks stumbling out of your bar on weekends. We've lost enough to fear already. The line went quiet, Harlan's discomfort palpable even through the speakers. He muttered something about regulations, then signed off, leaving the station in a heavier silence. The cub stirred then, a soft whine escaping its throat, paws kneading weakly at the blanket. Elena knelt beside it, her hand resting lightly on its side, feeling the rapid flutter beneath. In that touch, memory flooded unbidden. Her son, Mateo, in his hospital bed, his small chest rising and falling under monitors that beeped like accusations. She'd held him through fevers, whispered promises against the chill of loss, but in the end, the world had turned away, deeming his fight too rare, too burdensome. The cub's difference mirrored that. White fur, a genetic whisper in a sea of shadows, abandoned not for fault, but for standing apart. Tears pricked her eyes, held back by sheer will as she stroked the cub's ear. "You're not alone anymore," she breathed, the words more vow than comfort. Tom watched from across the room, his own hands stilling on a syringe of antibiotics he'd warmed over the stove. He'd failed that farm dog decades ago, left it to the elements because his father called it mercy, but the boy's heart had carried the scar ever since. Now, seeing Eleanor's resolve, something cracked in him, a quiet redemption stirring, urging him to act beyond protocol. "I'll drive with you," he said abruptly, packing a duffel with supplies. "Can't let this one fade on some bureaucrat's desk." Lila nodded, folding the blanket tighter around the cub. "Take my truck, warm a cab, and I've got chains if the roads ice up. Just bring her back whole." As they prepared to move, the sun slipped behind the peaks, casting the station in twilight's embrace. The cub's eyes opened fully for the first time, locking onto Elena's with an intensity that bridged species. A silent acknowledgement, instinct recognizing the hand that chose kindness over abandonment. They lifted it carefully into a makeshift crate lined with Lila's wool, the creature's body limp but trusting, its breaths evening out under the promise of motion. The door swung open to the cooling evening, dust swirling in the headlights as Elena's truck, now Lila's, rumbled to life. The highway stretched empty ahead, engines cooling in the distance, but this drive carried more than miles. A moral crossroads where fear could yield to compassion and a white tiger's fate might redeem the souls it touched. Trepidation hung in the cab like fog, the cub's crate secured on the back seat, its soft whines punctuating the hum of tires on asphalt. Tom rode shotgun, maps spread on his lap, while Elena gripped the wheel, the weight of decision pressing heavier than the gathering dark. Town lights flickered on the horizon, a reminder of judgments waiting, voices calling the cub a menace, unworthy of the risk. But in the rear view, those blue eyes gleamed faintly, a beacon against the night urging them forward. The road twisted onward, cold mornings forgotten in the heat of this shared vigil, where survival hung on the thread of human mercy. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and compassion can travel. The headlights carved twin tunnels through the encroaching night, illuminating stretches of empty highway, flanked by skeletal aspens that clawed at the sky. Elena's hands tightened on the wheel, the vibration of the engine humming through her bones like a distant warning. Lila's truck was sturdy, its cab warmed by the heater's steady blast, but the chill seeped in anyway, from the frost-rimed windows, from the uncertainty coiling in her gut. In the back seat, the cub's crate sat secure, padded with blankets that muffled its occasional whimpers to faint echoes. Tom sat beside it, one hand resting lightly on the wire mesh, his thumb tracing slow circles as if willing strength into the tiny form within. Silence wrapped the cab like a shroud, broken only by the rhythmic thump of tires over frost-heaved cracks in the road. Eleanor glanced in the rear view, catching the glint of blue eyes in the dim light, a watchful gaze that seemed to pierce the dark, holding her accountable. The cub had settled somewhat since leaving the station, its breaths more even under the drip's slow nourishment, but vulnerability clung to it like the scent of damp fur. White tigers, Tom had explained once over coffee, were born from a recessive gene, a rarity that painted them as outsiders, even among their own. Abandoned not out of cruelty, but instinct's cold logic. Survival favored the hidden, the shadowed. This cub's difference was its sentence until human hands had intervened. The miles blurred, the reserve fading into rear-view memory, but doubt shadowed every curve. Elena's mind wandered to the ravine, to the mother's tracks, deep, purposeful, leading away without a backward glance. What drove a tigress to forsake her own? Fear of weakness in the pride, or a deeper sorrow, recognizing the world's cruelty to the unique? Elena's throat tightened, the parallel to Matteo surfacing again. His rare condition, the doctor's detached assessments, the way she'd begged for more time while the system turned indifferent. She'd failed him then, bound by protocols and grief. Not this time. The wheel creaked under her grip, a vow etched in the tension of her knuckles. Tom shifted, his voice emerging rough from the quiet. Roads icing up ahead. Slow it down. He didn't look at her, eyes fixed on the cub, which had begun to stir restlessly. A soft rasp escaped it, deeper than before, like a cough caught in the throat. Tom's hand stilled, then moved to check the IV line, his fingers probing gently. The cub's paw pressed against the mesh, trembling, its claws retracted in exhaustion rather than threat. In the lantern light, he'd rigged to the seat. Its fur gleamed ethereal, a stark contrast to the cab's worn leather and coffee stains, a living symbol of beauty born fragile. Elena eased off the gas, the truck's chains biting into the thin glaze forming on the asphalt. The highway stretched desolate, no other lights in sight, just the occasional silhouette of a deer freezing at the roadside before vanishing into the brush. Her radio sat silent on the dash. She'd turned it off after Harlan's call, unwilling to hear more warnings of liability, of the cub as a problem to be contained. But isolation amplified the stakes. The wildlife center was no guarantee. They'd seen cases like this. Exotics shuffled between facilities, lost in bureaucracy until they faded quietly. This cub needed advocates, not forms. A sudden jolt rocked the cab as the truck hit a deeper rut, the cub's whine sharpening into a pained keen that sliced the air. Tom cursed under his breath, unclasping the crate to lift the blanket-wrapped form onto his lap. "Easy, little one," he murmured, his voice a gravelly lullaby honed from years of bedside vigils. The cub's body went rigid, then limp, its chest heaving in erratic bursts. Fever, perhaps, or the strain of movement aggravating some hidden injury from the abandonment. The mother's rough rejection, leaving bruises unseen, but felt in every shudder. Tom's hand cupped its head, feeling the heat radiating through the fur, the rapid pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Elena's eyes flicked back, heart lurching. "How bad?" The words came out clipped, laced with the fear she couldn't shake. Tom didn't answer immediately, instead rummaging in the duffel for a thermometer, its beep cutting the tension like a verdict. "Temps spiking, dehydration's hitting harder than I thought. Needs fluids now. He worked methodically, adjusting the drip, but the cub's eyes squeezed shut, a low rumble vibrating from its throat, not a growl, but distress, instinct crying out in a language older than words. In that sound, Tom saw his boyhood failure replay. The farm dog, shivering under the porch, its pleas ignored until too late. He'd sworn never again, yet here he was. Hands trembling as he stroked the cub's flank, willing his steadiness to transfer. The road curved sharply, forcing Elena to focus, but her mind raced ahead to the center, its sterile halls, the experts who might save or condemn. What if they deemed the cub non-native, a threat to local wildlife? Euthanasia loomed as the humane option, a word that tasted like ash. She thought of Lila back at the station, her hands wrapping that blanket with a tenderness born of loss, whispering to the cub as if it could absolve her own regrets. The widow's fire on the radio had ignited something in Elena, a reminder that compassion wasn't weakness, but the truest strength. Another whine pulled her back, sharper this time. The cub arched slightly, paws batting weakly at the air, as if chasing shadows of its lost mother. Tom's face paled in the dashboard glow. She's fighting. Hold on. He administered a mild sedative from the kit, the syringe glinting as he injected it carefully, the cub's body easing into a shallow calm. But the effort drained him, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. Silence returned, heavier now, punctuated by the cub's softened breaths and the wind's mournful howl outside. Elena pushed the truck harder, the engine protesting, dust from the highway swirling in the beams like ghosts of choices past. In the quiet, revelation stirred unbidden for Tom. As he held the cub close, its warmth seeping through his jacket, he remembered not just the dog, but the reason he'd become a vet. A promise to his younger self, to never let difference dictate death. The cub's blue eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting his with a clarity that bridged the divide. A silent trust, instinct sensing the redemption in his touch. No words passed, but the moment hung, emotional truth reframing the night. This wasn't just rescue, it was absolution. A white tiger's plea, forcing him to reclaim what fear had stolen. The center's lights appeared on the horizon, a beacon amid the dark, but the drive had forged them anew. Eleanor gripping the wheel like a lifeline, Tom cradling life against his chest. The cub's breath steadied, faint but persistent, a testament to the fragile bond forming on this cold road. Yet tension lingered, the moral suspense of what awaited, salvation or separation. As they neared the gates, the engine cooled to an idle hum, the world holding its breath once more. Compassion had carried them this far, but the true test of survival, and the humans it revealed, lay just beyond. The Wildlife Center's gates loomed like a threshold between mercy and judgment. Floodlights cutting harsh angles through the midnight frost. Elena eased the truck to a stop, the engine's growl fading into the night's hush, leaving only the tick of cooling metal and the faint rustle of wind through chain-link fences. Her hands lingered on the wheel, knuckles pale from the grip that had held the road's uncertainties at bay. In the back seat, Tom shifted carefully, the cub cradled in his arms now, its body a warm weight against the chill seeping from the cab's seams. The creature's breaths came in soft, ragged pulls, steadied by the sedative, but shadowed by the fever's lingering heat. They stepped out into the cold, boots crunching on gravel that echoed like brittle bones underfoot. The center was a squat complex of concrete and glass, its windows glowing faintly against the dark, a sanctuary for the broken wild things of the region. Elena shouldered the duffel of supplies, her breath fogging the air as she nodded to the night guard. A burly man named Reyes, his face etched with the weariness of too many midnight arrivals. "Emergency from Blackwood," she said, voice low. the words carrying the weight of the drive's unspoken fears. Reyes glanced at the bundle in Tom's arms, his eyes widening at the flash of white fur, but he buzzed them through without question, the gate's hum a reluctant welcome. Inside, the air shifted to sterile warmth, laced with the faint tang of disinfectants and hay from distant enclosures. Dr. Meera Singh waited in the intake room, her white coat crisp under fluorescent lights that buzzed like distant insects. At 35, she was the center's lead vet, her hands steady from years of stitching wounds no animal chose. She'd been roused by Elena's radio call en route, her voice over the static calm but probing. Origin, condition, risks. Now, face to face, her dark eyes assess the cub with clinical precision, gloved fingers hovering before making contact. "White tiger," she murmured, more observation than surprise, as Tom laid the creature on the steel exam table. The cub's sides quivered under the lights, its blue eyes half open, pupils contracting against the glare, a silent plea amid the room's mechanical hum. Silence stretched as Meera worked, her movements deliberate. Vitals checked with the thermometer's beep, blood drawn in swift pricks that drew no more than a faint twitch from the cub. Elena stood back, arms crossed against the chill that followed her inside, watching the tiny chest rise and fall. The drive had forged a bond, fragile as frost, but here it felt exposed, vulnerable to the protocols that governed this place. Tom's hands fidgeted at his sides, the farm dog's ghost stirring again, the way its eyes had dimmed under indifferent skies, a failure he'd carried like a stone. He met Meera's gaze, his voice gravelly. "She's a fighter, abandoned by her own for that coat. Don't let the rarity make her a specimen." Meera's expression softened fractionally, but doubt flickered in her eyes. Rarity means complications. Non-native, potentially invasive. Will stabilize, but quarantine's standard. Tests for diseases, genetic profiling, if she's deemed a threat. The words trailed, heavy with implication, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Elena's breath hitched. She'd heard the undertone before, in hospital corridors, where Mateo's difference became a checklist, his humanity reduced to odds. The cub's paw extended weakly, brushing the table's edge, as if sensing the shift, an instinctive reach that tugged at the room's tension. The exam deepened into crisis as Meera scanned the cub's underbelly, her brow furrowing. Bruising here, internal. From the abandonment, likely. The mother didn't go gentle. No gore marred the scene, just the subtle swell of hidden trauma revealed in the cub's labored exhale, a soft wheeze that filled the quiet like a confession. Tom's face drained of color, his hand pressing lightly to the fur, feeling the heat spike anew. "Field surgery?" he asked, voice edged with the urgency of a man reclaiming his purpose. Meera hesitated, glancing at the clock, 2 a.m., the on-call surgeon hours away. The center's resources were stretched, funding wars with bureaucracy, leaving gaps where lives teetered. In that pause, Elena knelt beside the table, her trembling hand mirroring the cub's quiver as she stroked its ear. The fur was soft, warmer now, but the eyes locked on hers with a depth that reframed the sterile room. Not a patient, but a soul adrift, its difference a mirror to unspoken losses. "If we wait," she whispered, more to herself than the others, "it's no different than the ravine." Tears welled, held back by the bite of the air, her voice cracking the silence like thin ice. Meera watched, her own composure cracking, a memory surfacing of her first case, a wolf pup euthanized for public safety, its trusting gaze haunting her shifts ever since. Compassion flickered, born from the danger of delay. The cub's weakening pulse, a ticking judgment. Decision hung, then fell. "Prep the OR," Meera said, her tone resolute, hands already moving to assemble tools. Tom assisted, his steadiness returning as he warmed fluids over a Bunsen burner. the flames' glow casting shadows that danced like uncertain hopes. Elena stayed close, wrapping a clean towel around the cub's lower half. Her touch gentle, whispering encouragements in Spanish, words her son had loved, now offered to this forsaken life. The cub responded faintly, its body easing under the care, a low rumble vibrating not in pain, but recognition, a silent connection bridging fear and instinct. The surgery unfolded in hushed intensity, the room's hum yielding to the soft snip of instruments and Mira's measured breaths. No dramatic flair, just the raw work of mending, sutures closing hidden tears, antibiotics flowing to fight the infection's grip. Tom's hands assisted, steady now, redemption threading through each precise motion. The farm dog's failure transmuted into this act, proving difference deserved defense. Elena's eyes never left the cub, her heart hitching at each shallow rise of its chest, the emotional turn awakening her own buried fire. Saving this white ghost might not erase Mateo's absence, but it honored the fight, the choice to act against abandonment. As the final stitch set, the cub's breaths evened, a fragile rhythm holding against the night. Mira stepped back, peeling off gloves with a sigh that carried relief and weariness. She's stable, for now. The words landed soft, but the undercurrent lingered. Quarantine loomed, decisions on release or relocation hanging like dawn's first light. Outside, the frost thickened, engines silent in the lot, but inside, the air warmed with possibility. The cub stirred, eyes fluttering open to meet Elena's once more, a blue spark of survival that forced confrontation. In its gaze, they saw their own misunderstood strengths, the beauty in choosing kindness amid the wild's indifferent math. Silence returned, deeper now, broken only by the cub's contented sigh. The center's halls stretched empty, but this room held a quiet victory. A white tiger's plea answered, revealing the rescuer's true measure. Yet the story pressed on, the dawn threatening revelations that could shatter or seal their bond. Compassion's thread taut against the coming light. Dawn's first pale light filtered through the center's narrow windows, turning the recovery room into a mosaic of greys and muted golds. The cub lay curled on a heated pad within a spacious enclosure, its white fur rising and falling in the steady cadence of sleep earned through ordeal. No longer the shivering wisp from the ravine, it seemed almost ethereal now, paws tucked beneath its chin, blue eyes closed against the world's lingering threats. The air hummed with the soft whir of monitors, tracking vitals that had stabilized overnight, but tension coiled in the quiet like smoke from a distant fire. Elena sat on a stool outside the glass partition, her back against the cool wall, coffee gone cold in her mug. Sleep had evaded her in the on-call bunk, her mind replaying the surgery's hushed urgency, Mira's gloved hands steady over the cub's bruised form, Tom's quiet assistance, the faint rasp of breaths that had held against the edge. The center's protocols loomed now, a bureaucratic shadow, genetic tests pending, consultations with state officials on the cub's status. Exotic, non-native, potentially hazardous, the labels that could strip away the fragile sanctuary they'd fought for. Her fingers traced the mug's rim, the ceramic warm against the chill seeping from the concrete floor. Tom paced the hallway, his boots soft on the linoleum, pausing every few steps to peer through the glass. At 68, exhaustion etched deeper lines into his face, but his eyes held a clarity born of the night's redemption. The cub's trust during the procedure, its body yielding to his touch without resistance, had unlocked something long buried. No longer haunted by the farm dog's fading gaze, he felt the weight lift, replaced by a quiet resolve. Yet doubt whispered, what if the test confirmed the cub's rarity as a curse, marking it for relocation to some distant zoo, caged and forgotten? Mira emerged from her office, charts in hand, her steps measured against the early hour. She joined Elena, offering a nod that carried the weariness of decisions deferred. Vitals are strong, No infection signs yet, but the call starts soon. Wildlife Board, feds if it escalates. They'll want provenance, risk assessments. Her voice was low, laced with the conflict of a vet who'd balanced compassion against policy too many times. In the cub's case, the white coat screamed rarity, a genetic anomaly that drew attention like a flare, attention that could save or doom. Mira's own past flickered unspoken, a orphaned lynx she'd advocated for, only to see it euthanized amid public outcry over invasive threats. The memory tightened her jaw, her hand pressing briefly to the glass as if to shield the sleeping form. Silence settled again, broken by the cub's faint stir, a paw flexing in dream, whiskers twitching as if scenting the air for familiar warmth. Elena rose, entering the enclosure with practiced caution, the door's latch clicking softly. She knelt beside the pad, her hand hovering before resting lightly on the cub's flank. The fur was plush now, warmed by recovery, and the creature's side pressed subtly into her palm, instinct seeking the anchor of care. In that contact, Elena's breath hitched, tears blurring the blue eyes that fluttered open. The cub's gaze met hers, unblinking, a depth that pierced the exhaustion, a silent recognition, as if it sensed the parallel scars. Abandonment's sting, the world's rejection of difference. Outside, Tom watched, his throat working against the swell of emotion. Revelation dawned slow, reframing the cub's plea, not just survival, but a mirror to his own overlooked strengths. The boy who'd bandaged strays in secret, the man who'd chosen healing over hardness. He stepped in, joining Elena on the floor, his rough hand extending to stroke the cub's ear. The creature leaned into it, a low rumble vibrating from its chest. Not distress, but contentment, a bond forged in the wild's indifferent calculus, now tempered by human mercy. Mira observed from the doorway, her clinical facade cracking. In the cub's trusting lean, she saw her lynx's ghost absolved, the choice to fight revealing her truest measure. The morning unfolded in measured rhythms, Mira adjusting the IV, Tom mixing formula with hands steadier than they'd been in years, Elena whispering encouragements that coaxed the cub to lap weakly at a shallow dish. Dialogue was sparse, words unnecessary amid the shared vigil, the rustle of fur against padding, the soft suckle of nourishment, the distant hum of the center waking to routine. But tension built as the phone rang, sharp against the hush. It was Harlan again, his voice crackling from the reserve line, laced with the town's growing murmur. "Elena's truck's still there? Folks are talking. Poachers, escaped circus cat, you name it. Board wants updates. If it's a threat, we handle it local." Elena's grip tightened on the receiver, her eyes never leaving the cub, which had begun to play fight with a rolled towel, paws batting with budding energy. "It's no threat, Harlan. It's healing." The words carried steel, born from the night's forge, but the sheriff's paws held warning, pressure mounting, judgments from afar labeling the cub's beauty as peril. Lila's voice broke in then, patched through from the station, her tone fierce, hands lightly clenched around the phone back home. "Tell them it's ours to protect, like we protect our own." The elderly widow's advocacy, sparked by her own loss, wove into the line, a chorus against the fear. As the call ended, the cub rose unsteadily, circling Elena's knee before settling against her leg, its warmth a quiet defiance. The room filled with unspoken truth. This white ghost, abandoned for its difference, had awakened loyalties long dormant, Eleanor's grief transmuted to guardianship, Tom's failure to purpose, Mira's doubts to determination. Outside, the sun climbed, melting frost into streams that traced the fences, mirroring the thaw within. But rising stakes pressed. The board's arrival loomed by noon, their verdict a moral precipice, released to the wild, where difference spelled doom or sanctuary, risking the center's fragile resources. Elena lifted the cub gently, cradling it as she stepped toward the window, the world beyond a blur of pines and highway. The creature's head nestled under her chin, breath syncing with hers in a rhythm of shared hope. Tom and Mira flanked her, hands brushing the enclosure's bars, the silence heavy with the weight of what came next. Compassion had bridged the divide, but survival demanded more, a stand against the indifferent tide, where the cub's eyes, bright with instinct, forced them to claim their own misunderstood strength. The center's gates rattled faintly in the wind, engines approaching on the distant road. The dawn's promise teetering on the edge of revelation. In that held breath, the white tiger's story deepened, its presence a catalyst for silent justice. Humans confronting the beauty in vulnerability, choosing bonds over fear. The cub's paw pressed against Elena's chest, a tiny heartbeat echoing the larger fight as the world outside stirred toward confrontation. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of this white tiger reach more people who still believe in kindness. The board's arrival shattered the dawn's fragile peace, their SUVs crunching over the frost-laced gravel like intruders in a sacred hush. Eleanor stood at the enclosure's edge, the cub nestled against her side, its warmth a quiet anchor amid the swirl of voices echoing down the center's sterile halls. The creature's blue eyes followed her every movement, paws kneading softly at the padded floor, a budding playfulness that belied the night's shadows. Outside, the pines whispered in the wind, their branches heavy with melting ice, dripping rhythms that marked time's reluctant march. Dr. Mira Singh faced the panel in the conference room, a cluster of stern faces from the State Wildlife Board, clipboards clutched like shields, their murmurs laced with the cold precision of policy. Tom lingered in the doorway, his broad frame a silent sentinel, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets to hide their faint tremble. Elena stayed with the cub, but her ears strained toward the debate. The rarity of the white coat, the risks of release, the ethical tangle of human intervention in nature's design. "It's a genetic outlier," one official intoned, voice flat as the forms before him. "Releasing it invites predation, disrupts ecosystems. Quarantine, then relocation. Standard procedure." Mira's response cut sharp, her words measured but fierce, drawing on the surgery's success, the cub's stabilizing vitals, the moral imperative of second chances. Silence fell between arguments, thick as the fog rolling in from the highway, where distant engines hummed like fading echoes. Elena knelt, her hand tracing the cub's ear, feeling the soft vibration of its purr, a sound raw with instinct, survival's quiet triumph. The creature leaned into her, head butting gently, its difference no longer a curse, but a mark of resilience forged in abandonment and mended by hands that chose otherwise. In its gaze, Elena saw Mateo's echo again, not in loss, but in the unyielding spark of life that defied odds. Her breath hitched, tears blurring the enclosure's bars as the weight of revelation settled. This cub hadn't just been saved, it had saved her, pulling her from grief's numb grip into a world where compassion bridged the wild divide. The door swung open then, Mira emerging with a nod that carried guarded hope. "They're granting temporary sanctuary here. Tests first, but no immediate relocation. We'll monitor, build a case for release, protected with tracking." Her voice softened, eyes meeting Elena's through the glass. "You bought her time." Tom exhaled, a gravelly sound of relief, stepping forward to press his palm to the partition. The cub stirred at the motion, rising on unsteady legs to nose the air toward him, its tail flicking with a curiosity that pierced the room's tension. In that simple act, Tom's redemption crystallized, the farm dog's ghost dissolving in the warmth of fur against glass, his hands no longer failing but guiding, proving instinct's loyalty could heal old wounds. But the morning's true shock unfolded beyond the center's fences, where the wind carried a low, resonant rumble from the tree line, a sound that froze the air, drawing Reyes from his post and Mira to the window. Elena's pulse quickened, the cub's ears perking sharply, body tensing with recognition. Tracks appeared in the softening frost, large, deliberate paw prints circling the perimeter, deep and fresh, mirroring those from the ravine days before. The mother tigress had come, not in rage, but in a hesitant vigil. Her white streaked form glimpsed through the brush, eyes gleaming with a mix of wariness and yearning. Whispers rippled through the staff. She tracked her offspring's scent across miles, drawn by the faint calls echoing on the wind, her initial rejection yielding to a deeper maternal pull. Mira radioed Elena, voice hushed with awe. "She's here, watching, not aggressive, just waiting." The board paused their deliberations, peering out as the tigress paced the shadowed edge, her breath fogging the dawn like a plea unspoken. No one moved at first, the moment suspended in cinematic stillness, the cub whining softly, pressing against the enclosure's door, its tiny form echoing the larger one's silhouette. Elena's hand trembled as she unlatched the gate, instinct overriding protocol. The air thick with the scent of wet fur and pine resin. Tom flanked her, Mira close behind, their breaths sinking in shared suspense, the moral precipice of reunion, where fear could shatter or seal a bond across the wild's indifferent veil. The cub tumbled out, legs wobbling but determined, drawn by the rumble that vibrated through the ground. It paused midway, head tilting, then bounded forward with a mule that cut the silence like dawn's first light. The tigress froze, her massive frame lowering, ears flicking, not in threat but invitation. Nose to nose they touched, the cub nuzzling into the warmth of its mother's flank, the white coats blending in a ghostly embrace. The shocking truth reframed everything. Abandonment hadn't been finality, but a test of survival's weight, the tigress returning when her cub's cries pierced the isolation. Proving difference could forge unbreakable ties. Elena watched, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, the scene unfolding like a documentary's quiet climax. Dust settling on the gravel, cold air warming with the sun's rise, the highway empty, save for this miracle. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice a whisper. She knew. Mira nodded, her eyes reflecting the pair's retreat into the trees, the tigress guiding her young one with gentle nudges, their forms vanishing into the horizon's golden haze. The world needed this kindness, this confrontation with instinct's raw hope. Humans stepping back to let survival reclaim its own, revealing the beauty in misunderstood strength. As the tigress walked into the horizon, her rare cub at her side, the reserve's shadows softened, a testament to compassion's silent justice. Bonds formed in fear and loss had endured. Redemption etched in every paw print, fading into the wild. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of White Tigress abandoned her rare cub for being different. What happened next shocked everyone. See you in the next one.